Second thing, stay with me on this. Make it a purple cow, not a brown cow presentation. What am I talking about? Seth Godin, that famous kind of internet leader, he's great. He talks about a time when it just dawned on him that while he was driving through the countryside, he saw field after field with brown cows in, and never once stopped, never thought it was odd, never thought it was strange. And it made him think, what if I was to drive along and all of a sudden in a field there would be a purple cow? Everybody would stop. Everybody would be taking pictures. Everybody would be talking about it. And he comes to the conclusion, he says this: something remarkable is worth talking about, worth noticing. It's interesting. It's a purple cow. Boring stuff, he says, is invisible. It's a brown cow. And think about your last church service. Would you describe it as a purple cow service or a brown cow service? If you're going to avoid becoming invisible, you've got to offer something remarkable, like seeing a purple cow in the middle of a field. And like I've said before, in my experience, services that follow the same routine, the same rhythm, week after week after week, they're just brown cow services that become background noise. They become invisible. So how do we plan for purple cow moments? I don't know if you've heard of a lady called Nancy Duarte. She's incredible. I heard an interview with her recently, and she's been a guru to the stars. She's taught people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and politicians and business leaders ways in which they can improve their presentations. And she says this: she says every presentation should have what she describes as a star moment, STAR. And that means something they'll always remember. Star, something they'll always remember. What are star moments? They're moments, they're memorable moments in a presentation that stick in the minds of the audience long after the presentation is over. It's Martin Luther King at the Lincoln Memorial back in the 1960s. He goes off script because he feels like he's losing the audience, and he does his "I have a dream" speech. He wasn't supposed to say that, but it captures people and it's become part of our language. It's Steve Jobs in 2008 when he's launching the iPhone, where he wanders off stage and he turns around and he goes, "Oh, one more thing." It's Bill Gates. A few years ago, Bill Gates was asked to do a TED talk, and his presentation was all about fatal diseases like malaria and how they're transmitted via mosquitoes. And halfway through this 27-minute talk, he holds up a jar. And this jar is filled with live mosquitoes. And he wants the audience to see it. And he says quite powerfully, he says, it's always poor people that get bitten by mosquitoes and infected this way. It shouldn't just be the reserve of poor people. And he pauses for a moment. You can go online and see it. And he unscrews the lid and he lets these mosquitoes out around the room. And there's this panic and silence and nervousness in the room. And he quickly adds that these particular mosquitoes were free of malaria. But his extreme action in that moment caused that talk to go viral. In fact, it caused that 60-second moment in the 27-minute talk to go viral. Duarte says, let me quote this. She says, "You want your presentation to be remembered? Consider putting a star moment into your presentation so that you stand out from the monotonous masses. Perhaps it will be a swarm of mosquitoes. Perhaps it will just be a part of your presentation where you turn off your slides and speak directly to your audience from your heart." I did this a little while ago in church. Have you ever been in church when, I was leading the service and it was one of those moments where the band were midway through a worship set and I can't explain it. Something was happening in the room. It felt like God was so close. It almost felt damp with the presence of God. It felt like God had unzipped heaven and something really, hairs on the back of the neck stuff. And I don't know what it was. And I checked it out with people around me and they said, what's going on here today? And so as the band came to the end of their set, I just wandered up onto stage and it was just I was just grateful to God for the moment. I just took my shoes off. And I held them up by my head while people stood there. And I said, there was a time when Moses stands before this burning bush and God says to him, "Moses, you're in my presence and this is holy ground. Take your shoes off." And I said, "I don't know about you. Something's going on here that feels very holy." We're going to sing another song. If you want to take your shoes, you don't have to. Honestly, you don't have to. You're not a lesser citizen if you do. But if you want to take your shoes off and stand with me, let's do it. It was a star moment on the hoof. But they don't need to all be on the hoof. You can plan them as well. So I was down to preach in a few weeks' time on, in the book of James. I was down to preach, I think it's James chapter 2, where James talks about the fact that so often we show favoritism to the rich and we disregard the poor. We let the rich person come and sit down front and the poor person we push to the back. So I called a friend of mine and I said to him, Dave, would you mind? The church didn't know him. He'd never been to our church. I said, would you mind? I gave him an old jacket I found in a charity shop. I said, would you mind wearing this jacket and sitting outside church? I want you to put a dead fish in the jacket for 2 weeks so it stinks. And I want you to grow a beard and don't wash your hair. I want you to sit outside our church with a dirty, rotten bag next to you. I want you to look like a tramp. Sit outside church, and at a given moment, I want you to wander in, wander down the front, stand up on stage and read James chapter 2. And he sat outside the front of church as people started to wander in. And people, bless them, people went and sat next to him and talked to him, asked if they could help him, invited him into church. He was really quite taken aback with how people responded to him. But he said no to all of it. And then at the given moment, he wanders into church and he wanders down the front and he starts to wander up onto the stage. And people went to try and stop him. And I said, no, it's okay. And my friend, dressed like a tramp with a beard and hair and smelling like fish, wanders up with his dirty old plastic bag and he empties it onto the floor, and there are old beer cans and whiskey bottles that falls out and people have no idea what's going on. And he picks up this dusty old Bible and he puts it on the pulpit, wipes his nose, and he starts to read from James about how you show favoritism to rich people and not to poor. I'm telling you, that was a star moment in our church. And you can do those kind of things. They don't have to take big budget. So I want you to pause for a moment, pause this video, and I want you to ask yourself 2 questions. When did you last create a star moment, a purple cow moment, a remarkable moment in your service? Go back and remember that, recall that. And then the second thing is I want you to think about the future. What's coming up? Brainstorm ideas of where you could put a star moment into your next service over the next month or so. Finally on this subject, I've been fascinated all of my life with the Disney company, fascinated about how they connect such a worldwide audience. And one of the things Disney talks about, which blew my mind, they talk about peak and end moments, the importance of peak and end moments. It doesn't matter that kids might have spent the day sweltering in the Florida heat and standing in long lines waiting to go in on rides and crying because they're hungry. And it doesn't matter that they do all that as long as they have a peak moment and an end moment. A peak moment might just be a ride on Space Mountain that's just blown their mind. And maybe an end moment was that they were able to buy some Mickey Mouse ears, and as they wandered out of the park, Mickey waved to them or came up and gave them a high five or a hug. And Disney say that when those peak and end moments happen, it tips the overall balance of the day into the positive and it keeps people coming back. Do you know every time you plan a service, do you know what the peak moment is? And what's your end moment like? Because it's more important than you think. So the first 2 things we've talked about in order to bring delight back into your church services is make passion the foundation of your presentation. And secondly, as we've just been talking about, we need to make it purple cow, not brown cow presentations.